These two cameras in front of me are $10,000 each. And with over $20,000 worth of modern day digital cameras and glass, you know they're going to be amazing. They look the same, are made by the same iconic company, and are jam-packed with features that professional photographers have come to expect from modern day cameras in this price range. But something's missing.
You see, this camera right here can only take photos in black and white.
And that led me to ask, in a world where technology is increasing and cameras are being jam-packed with more features than we know what to do with, why would anyone want to purchase a $10,000 camera that only shoots black and white?
I think it's fair to say that one of the greatest things that's ever happened to photography and film is color. It opened our eyes and it brought the world that we saw into our creativity and our art and our storytelling through photo and video. Now, admittedly, I've heard that it wasn't really well received at first, and oftentimes people thought that black and white, especially for photography, was the artistic medium where color might have been a little bit more immature or for amateurs. But it's funny to see how things have changed. And so choosing a black and white camera today almost feels like a step backwards. So in order to understand why someone would choose a $10,000 black and white camera, I first have to test these two Leicas side by side. I have to really dive into the science behind the sensors and what actually makes them different. And lastly, I've got to hear from other photographers who shoot in black and white to really understand why they might choose one and why they even prefer black and white photography over color photography.
When using a camera, it's easy to take for granted the amazing computing power that produces the images we see. And honestly, cameras have come a long way. So when comparing black and white sensors to color sensors, we have to dig deeper than just the image they output. So let's get a little scientific. Now, there are a lot of different sensors out there, but for today's breakdown, let's talk about a Bayer array. We do have a slight problem. You see, Leica and many other major camera companies don't like to tell you exactly what is under the hood. So while we can assume they use a Bayer array, it's just not guaranteed. Regardless, the tech is similar enough to move forward.
So for today's example, I want to use this behind me, this makeshift Bayer sensor with a color filter array. So this right here is my best attempt to show you how a color filter array works. There's a lot of text around this, but I thought it would be easier if I could show you as opposed to trying to yap about it and make it make sense. In the front here, we have the color filter array with our photo sites. You can see that we have blue, green, and red channels. And one thing to note is that there's going to be a lot more green channels than there are blue and red channels. And I'll get into that in just a little bit. In reality, you're going to have a lot more photo sites and it's not going to be separated like this inside of your camera. But for this purpose, I wanted to make sure I showed you what was going on when you were taking a photo. Behind the photo sites in the color filter array is our sensor. Let me show you what's going on back here. So back here, you can see that the light that is coming through our lens and hitting our sensor is being registered on our sensor here. And this is actually how our sensors are understanding and calculating the color that is coming into them. And they're calculating them through the photo sites because each quality of color is being registered by the corresponding photo site. So blue light is being registered by blue, green by green, and red via red. And remember when I said that there were more green than red or blue? That is because when this was discovered, when the science came out around this, they figured out that green light was more sensitive, that it could take in more information than red and blue. And they found that you can get a sharper image with a higher amount of green photo sites on your sensor than red and blue. That being said, green, red, and blue can only register green, red, and blue light. So we're actually losing about 1 to 1/3 stop of light when it hits our sensor. The way that our sensors compensate for this is called demosaicing. I'm not gonna get into the science of it right now, but essentially what happens is that when a corresponding color hits a corresponding photo site, the sensor and the camera understand and kind of infer the other colors around it, giving us a full and broad spectrum of color on our sensors. So this is how, in a very rudimentary way, our color sensors are interpreting and calculating the color values that are being received when taking an image. And here is where the magic really starts to take place when it comes to a black and white sensor versus a color sensor. You see, black and white sensors don't have the CFA. They don't have a color filter array that is dictating and trying to process color. So when we take it away, we're actually getting all the light registered onto the sensor because it's not having to compute what type of color the light is, the value. So there's less computing power needed in regards to differentiating between colors, but that also means that there's more opportunity for light to be hitting the sensor. So we should have a more sensitive to light sensor than with a colored sensor. And this is where people often say that black and white cameras shine best in low light scenarios or high ISO scenarios because there is less interference, there's less demosaicing, there's less computing information. We're just getting light onto the sensor, so it should be a clearer and cleaner image.
So that is how these sensors work. And while I do feel that I have a better understanding of why you might want to choose a black and white camera over a color sensor camera, we still need to do some testing. So we're gonna wrap it up for tonight. In the morning, we're gonna wake up early, we're gonna get outside and take photos and compare them side by side.
Getting up early to test cameras is ideal. I love it. The light is perfect, and it actually allows me to compare and contrast these cameras in different ISO settings. As the sun rises, I can change my settings, get that harsh light, get the shadows that I want, and really test to see if there is a noticeable difference. My theory is going to be that the difference will not be seen probably below ISO 1200, 1600, but as we push further up, we'll probably see a little bit more clarity in the midtones, the grays, and then the shadows. Now, the thing I do love about side-by-side testing is that I get to have both these cameras with me, but there's not a good way for me to handhold and produce good side-by-side results. So we're moving over to this. This is an Enduro ball head tripod with a Vanguard multi-camera mounting system. And this is going to allow me to have my cameras side by side to give me almost a one-to-one image so I can compare and contrast properly.
All right, so I've been out here for a better part of an hour and a half just trying to compare the two cameras. The key to comparing these two cameras is to lock in identical settings. And alongside of that, I'm also showing you straight out of camera looks. First up, we're looking at ISO 200 with the sun acting as a backlight. You can see the M11's clouds are far more contrasty with heavier blacks, while the mono has more gray transitional midtones from our highlights. When we lift these two images, we can see that the highlights are blown out in both images. But it seems they are a tad more blown out on the M11 mono than the traditional M11. Let's look at a bit higher of an ISO at 1600. Again, you can see the presence of those dark shadows so much more prominently in the M11 than you do in the mono. Let's do a grain check. From what I can see just by zooming in, it seems that there's a bit more sharpness and clarity on the trunk of this fallen tree with the M11 mono compared to the M11.
There is something to be said about taking photos in black and white strictly. Focusing on light and contrast only is really freeing and very fun. I went to the zoo and snapped a few more photos so you guys can see just this camera in action. I'm going to show you these edited photos as well so you can see how well you can push and stretch these DNG files.
I think I'm starting to wrap my head around the M11 monochrome. But to really understand why someone would pick this up, we need to turn to a professional with a fresh perspective. Meet Melissa, a talented and celebrated photographer. I knew talking to her would shed some light on black and white photography, and I wanted to ask her if she'd ever considered using a camera like the M11 monochrome. We've got a lot to cover, but I would love, first and foremost, for you to introduce yourself to our followers and let them know what you do.
So my name is Melissa Findley. I am a commercial travel landscape photographer. I'm originally from Australia, but I currently reside in Bend, Oregon, in the beautiful Pacific Northwest.
So, okay, when it comes to your photography and kind of your niche or your expertise, where would you say that lies? And then how did you get into that?
So I predominantly work in the travel space and for photographing nature. So nature is definitely my main sort of subject, and that also encompasses like our place within nature. How I fell into that was it's really a full circle moment. As a teenager, I learned film, and I was like in the darkroom in art class, and as a teenager, I really just documented life. But my life growing up in Australia really consisted of, being by the ocean, in the rainforest, all of the sort of adventures that I would do on a day-to-day basis. Full circle, what I do in my career is highlight that now as a full-time photographer. So it's an evolution of everything that I learned in the beginning, I now get to do on a day-to-day basis, but it really has the origins of what made me fall in love with photography and documentation of life, of the world around us, and of our place within nature as well.
You know, today this video is about black and white photography.
Yes.
And the breakdown that I've been doing and the question, the problem I'm trying to solve, right? What I really want to know is, why would you choose black and white photography over color photography?
I love this question because I think I'm also going to take it back to the origins of photography. Black and white photography is timeless. It's emotive. It really has the opportunity to simplify the way we see the world, and therefore, without using words, you can kind of portray an emotion through black and white photography. Back to the origins of me learning photography in the darkroom, black and white truly taught me to attune to light, to composition, to really simplify scenes and learn the basics in a simple way that really captivated my attention because it is so emotive. I love the concept of having different mediums for different components of my creativity. And I think that that is the exciting aspect. Explore your creativity or let your creativity flourish. So that's the way that I look at it. And it excites me. It really excites me.
Does your approach change, thinking strictly I'm using a black and white camera?
I think so. Personally, I think so. I think maybe I try to be intentional as a human anyway, but I think that I am maybe more intentional with the black and white. If I have a black and white sensor, or, a roll of film in my camera that's black and white, I try and be more intentional with what I'm creating and more intentional with making it different to say that I would photograph a scene for work. So like if it was a landscape, maybe I would attune to something that is honestly like a blade of grass with a little bit of light behind it, and the contrast between one side being in the shadow and one side being the light. So just really trying to attune my attention differently to what the story is that I'm trying to portray. I actually also really love photographing people in black and white. So I think that that really comes through when I am in that medium, is that I will sort of focus on the emotion and the light in someone's eye, or, the depth that you can really get from black and white photography. So I would answer that yes, my approach changes because I feel excited to explore it differently.
So when you're on the field and you are strictly using like black and white, either film or a sensor, what are those advantages and disadvantages of having software and a camera that is limited in this way?
As you're saying that, there's only one quote unquote disadvantage that I could think of. And I'm going to start with that because I would like to flip it to the advantage. Is that potentially, like in a commercial space, it might not be in a lot of briefs. You might not get a lot of black and white photography in your brief from your client. So that could technically be a quote unquote disadvantage. And when I say that, I find it really interesting because I personally don't see it as so. I personally see it as an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to learn, and an opportunity to hone and develop your skills in a way that's really simple and really stripped back. I've held a camera in my hand for over 20 years at this point, and I still maintain that I learn every time I pick up the camera. And I think the advantage of having an incredible system like this, the monochrome only aids to that. There's more contrast, there's higher sharpness, there is a beauty in the storytelling that you will get from that sensor that you won't necessarily find in any other capacity. Even as a nature photographer, and I'm sitting here saying that like on a commercial basis, it may be slightly different, but when I break it down or take it back to the origins, it is all black and white photography, and it's what put places like Yosemite on the map. It's what put places like we have in the Cascade Mountain Ranges here on the map, was black and white photography. So I think if you see things as a learning experience, you're opening so many doors of creativity. And what you just said is that it's not necessarily pigeonholing yourself. It could be ultimately your career path. So it's nice to think that you could explore that.
Melissa, thank you so much for the time today. I'm leaving inspired, leaving also extremely sad that I have to give up the M11 back to our inventory so people could rent it.
I want to leave here and try out that camera. Like, I want to rent that camera. So maybe if you give it back, then I can rent it.
Oh yeah, that's exactly what's going to happen. They're just going to take it from my hands and put it right into yours. And that is the end of our journey. I really do believe that I have a better understanding, especially after talking with Melissa, on the perspective as why someone would choose a black and white censored camera. And it really does boil down to your desired experience, your desired aesthetic and look. And ultimately, there is an opportunity to learn with a camera like this. There is something different in the approach to photography, and there's something different in the results that you get. Now, I am going to send that camera back to our inventory, so if you want to pick it up, you know where to go. Today's video has been a blast to make. I appreciate you guys hanging out with me, and I will see you in the next one. All right. Peace.